Thank you for joining us today on the Alaska Weather Program. I'm meteorologist Emily Niebuhr. It's June 27th, 2023. You can reach us at 1-855-937-4977, and you can find us online at weather.gov/Alaska, or you can email us at nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov. Let's take a look at our hazardous weather across the state. As you can see, we have very few advisories. We just have one along the Taku River near Juneau, and so let's take a look at that. Here's our flood advisory. Again, is due to a glacial dammed lake outburst, and so the Taku River is expected to crest near 43.6 feet around 10 p.m. tonight. And the flood advisory is in effect until 8 a.m. Wednesday, June 28th. So again, river levels are expected to decrease below minor flood stage by Wednesday morning. So again, people on the river should watch out for debris and expect cold water temperatures that could cause hypothermia. So if you are expected to be near the Taku River or live around there, be cautious this evening into tomorrow morning. We have a second glacial dam release concern near the Salmon River, and it started on the Salmon River near Hyder. And so water levels will continue to rise through the next few days as water drains from Summit Lake. There's always uncertainty in these events when the crest height and the timing. So stay tuned if you're living in that area or expecting to be out on the water. So again, be aware of debris in the river. Very cold water will increase the threat of hypothermia. And please reach out and report any impacts to the National Weather Service and keep an eye on this situation over the next few days. Again, our fire danger is fairly low across the state. As many of us have noticed, there's been a lot of rainfall and a lot of cloudy days. So most of our fuels are still pretty wet. We only have a few interior areas where fuels are perhaps, or rurgrass in this case, is at risk for fire. Let's take a look at our latest satellite imagery. You can see our low pressure system spinning out in the Bristol Bay area. We also have a weak low frontal system across much of the Gulf of Alaska, with a ridge along the interior ahead of this low pressure system. So again, on the map, here's our low Bristol Bay with its occluded stationary front crossing much of the Bering, kind of stagnant at the moment. We also have interior low causing widespread showers across that region. For tonight, that Bristol Bay low drifts further south into the Alaska Peninsula, and that frontal system stays draped along the Aleutian Islands. So again, expect widespread rainfall across these areas. We also see that low pressure system move into south central Alaska, so expect somewhat conditions tonight across those regions, as well as this low pressure system kind of pushes that coastal ridge out of the way in the Panhandle, bringing rain showers tonight. Again, Wednesday, we see this new low pressure system forming along this frontal boundary and moving into the western Bering. We have that other low pressure system continuing to drift south of the Alaska Peninsula. Meanwhile, this low is going to be moving in closer to the Panhandle. And a little bit of high pressure system. You have to go far north to find a high pressure system in our state right now, keeping drier conditions along the North Arctic coast. For Thursday, again, that high pressure system moves further eastward, but again, there's going to be some local coastal fog possible with that. And we're going to be having, again, low pressure in the interior causing widespread showers in the Fairbanks and central portions of our state. And again, that low pressure system is going to continue to drift further eastward, and again, rainy weather across much of our Aleutian Islands. And this frontal boundary gets stuck against the Panhandle and brings showers for your Thursday as well in that region. Let's take a look what temperatures we can expect with this wet weather. Again, Wednesday morning, we're going to be seeing temperatures in the upper 40s across much of the interior and in the lower 50s in the Panhandle area. By Wednesday afternoon, we see a little bit of warming in the interior. We see temperatures almost nudging to 70 near Golcana in the interior and near 64 in Talkeetna and 60 in Anchorage. Meanwhile, in the Panhandle, with that rain, we're going to be seeing temperatures in the 50s to lower 60s. For Thursday morning, again, we're going to see temperatures mainly in the mid-50s in the Panhandle area and upper 40s across much of South Central. By Thursday afternoon, again, we'll be warming close to 70 in the Talkeetna and in the Golcana areas. Excuse me, Golcana's 70. Talkeetna area will be about mid-60s. By Wednesday morning, along the Arctic coast, temperatures are going to be in the mid to upper 30s. Also on the Seward Peninsula, some 40s in the area for your Wednesday morning. Wednesday afternoon, again, we're seeing a nice warm 80 in the interior. So perhaps showers and thunderstorms by the afternoon hours. And temperatures in the 70s in the interior and warming into the mid to upper 40s along the Arctic coast. By Thursday morning, again, we're looking at temperatures in the mid-30s along the Arctic coast and temperatures near 60 in the overnight hours by your Thursday morning. Thursday afternoon, a little cooler, but still nudging towards 80 in the interior. And temperatures, we're seeing at 50 along the Arctic coast. So definitely a little bit of summertime weather out in the north. But Wednesday morning, as we're looking at the Bristol Bay areas, temperatures are going to be in the upper 40s. Again, we're having several low pressure systems that will keep temperatures a little cooler. And again, Wednesday afternoon, temperatures will try to nudge towards 60, maybe a few 60s near Bethel. But again, along the coast, upper 50s. By Thursday morning, again, we're looking at temperatures in the upper 40s across Bristol Bay, and a little warmer, but still mid-60s near the Bethel region.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Thank you for joining us for the aviation portion of this broadcast. This is your outlook for Wednesday for IFR flight conditions, which are denoted in red, which is lower ceilings and lower visibility for airplanes. So you can see we have, with two systems, we have a low impacting the Aleutians, and meanwhile we have a separate low impacting the Gulf of Alaska. So low ceilings along much of the coastal areas in the state. Meanwhile, in much of the interior for your Wednesday morning, we are going to be seeing much better visibilities for your flying on Wednesday morning. Wednesday afternoon, you can see the systems weaken a little bit. We do have slightly better visibility in western bearing as that system moves towards the east. But again, expect low ceilings and visibilities across into parts of the Panhandle and across much of the Gulf of Alaska coast. For your Thursday morning, again, we are going to be seeing widespread IFR conditions associated with that low pressure system and even some low clouds and visibilities along the Chukchi Sea coast. Same thing for your Gulf of Alaska, where again, we're going to have lower visibilities into the Panhandle Thursday morning associated with that low pressure system as it weakens and moves in towards the interior. By Thursday afternoon, conditions will mix out a little bit and we'll see some improvement across the area by Thursday afternoon. But again, perhaps a few showers along the mountains and valleys of the interior. Let's look at your passes. For Wednesday, for Inuktitut Pass, we're looking at VFR conditions. Again, Adigan Pass, we're expecting VFR conditions across much of the pass for Wednesday. Lake Clark, we're expecting MVFR conditions. For Rainy, MVFR conditions are expected Wednesday. Isabel Pass, we're expecting VFR conditions. In Tasta, we're also expecting VFR conditions. Tahina, we're also expecting VFR conditions, below MVFR conditions as you go towards the west. So be careful of some lower clouds as you go in the western part of the pass. Same story for Portage. We're expecting IFR conditions in the morning and improvements towards MVFR conditions, but throughout the day conditions will be better in the western portion of the entrance. For Wednesday, Chilkoot and White Passes are expected to start out as IFR conditions, but improve to MVFR by the afternoon hours. Let's take a look at your freezing levels across much of the state. Again, associated with that low pressure system, we are seeing 4,000-foot ceilings, freezing levels at 4,000 feet. So cooler conditions associated with that low pressure system. Again, as you go towards our high pressure ridge area across the Yukon and into central Alaska, we're seeing higher freezing levels, about 10,000 feet and then 8,000 feet. So definitely warmer conditions as you move in towards the interior. Meanwhile, our freezing levels at the surface are far up along the North Arctic coast. Let's look at your icing concerns. Again, with that system moving in, it's going to be bringing a lot of rain into portions of along the Alaska, Gulf of Alaska and into the Panhandle. Meanwhile, again, we're going to see widespread isolated icing associated with that weakening low in the Bering. So again, much of the state at risk for at least isolated moderate icing to considerable isolated moderate along the Gulf Coast as that system moves inland and brings a lot of rain with it. For our jet stream, again, a fairly decent jet stream for this time of year. We're looking at 120 knots across the central Aleutians. Again, this is at 30,000 feet. We also have a low pressure system. Again, it's centered along the Alaska Peninsula and a ridge of high pressure located in the interior. And we also have a jet of about 95 knots up across portions into the Kamchatka Peninsula. As we go lower at 9,000 feet, again, we still have remnants of that jet. It's at about 45 knots as you go into 9,000 feet. We also have a jet across portions of Prince William Sound of about 40 knots. As we go down lower into 3,000 feet, again, the jet weakens. We're just looking at winds of about maybe 20 or 30 knots at 3,000 feet. For your turbulence for Wednesday, again, associated with that system moving in along the coast, is going to have some gusty winds, so some considerable moderate turbulence along the Gulf of Alaska coast and through some of the passes along the Alaska Peninsula. Meanwhile, associated with that low out near the Bering, we are expecting widespread turbulence associated with those weak jets as we go west.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, and joining me once again is Eric Stevens from the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, or GINA, based at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Eric, welcome back to the show.
Well, Dave, it's great to be back. Thanks for inviting us again.
Sure thing. And today we want to talk about identifying burn scars. That would be the burned up area after a wildfire when the flames and the smoke are gone. We can see it if you drive by it on the roadway, of course, but from satellite we can also identify those places on the land, right?
You know it. You know that expression, ouch, that's going to leave a mark?
Yeah.
After you bang your knee getting out of the car. You go,
Oh, yeah.
Well, the ouch, it's going to leave a mark, that also applies to the landscape. Whenever a wildfire ravages through, it's going to leave a mark on the landscape. After a wildfire burns out, this is called a burn scar.
Okay.
And you can ask yourself, well, that's interesting. We can see a burn scar from space. Right. Then the question is, well, why does that matter? Okay. Who cares?
Yeah, fire's over.
Right, the fire is over. We don't need to worry about this anymore. It turns out you kind of do, because burn scars are important. There's this old rule of thumb in the weather business that flood follows fire. Okay. The action of the fire in killing off the vegetation, in baking, kiln drying the landscape a little bit, can hinder the land's ability to absorb rainfall. So if you have a fire, especially if it's in complex mountainous terrain, this is classic in California. It can happen somewhat in Alaska too. You get a wildfire in steep, hilly, or mountainous terrain, rips off all the vegetation off the landscape. Then 6 months later, there's a big rainstorm, and you get a flash flood in that area. So flood can follow fire. That's why you got to know where the burn scars are. Secondly, a fire needs fuel to maintain itself. So if there's an old burn scar left over from a year or two ago, and then another summer later here in Alaska in the interior, it's a big wildfire season, if there's a fire advancing toward an old burn scar, well, guess what? That old burn scar can be tougher terrain for that new fire to get through because there's not as much fuel in that burn scar. So they almost act like a natural fire break. These are a couple of reasons why you need to know where those burn scars are. Alaska Fire Service has limited resources. They want to put their people and their equipment where it does the most good. They need to know, well, this is an area where there's no burn scar. We better put people here because that fire could really run.
So really important for weather forecasters and fire weather forecasters for sure.
Oh, yeah.
But then how do weather satellites actually detect those burn scars?
Ah, good question.
Thanks.
Well, let's turn the Wayback Machine to the summer of 2015. That was a very active year. I've got a picture here taken up in the White Mountains. This is one of the fires in progress that summer, and if you look real close, you can almost see Frodo throwing the ring into the volcano there. So that's quite the vision. Well, let's look at a visible image. Here we are in Alaska's interior. This is before the fires got out of the cage in early summer of 2015. Let's zoom into the western interior here. Again, this is a weather satellite image of visible light, what the human eye can see. We're into the middle reach of the Yukon Valley there in the western interior, Galena area. And this is just a beautiful visible day. Nothing much going on. It's in early June before the fires really got active. But then in 2015, the fires got loose, especially in that western interior. Here's another image. The same satellite pass as that visible image, but now we're not quite looking at visible light.
Very different.
There's a slight change here. This image incorporates something called the veggie band. 0.86 micron wavelength. The micron's very tiny, but that wavelength responds to vegetation, the chlorophyll. So trees and grasses reflect that part of the electromagnetic spectrum back to the satellite. And so the satellite sees that. When signal comes at that wavelength to the satellite, we know, there's some vegetation growing there. This is great. You can identify coastlines so easily because you go from vegetation to water. Turns out if you have a burn scar, guess what? You burned away the vegetation, so that's going to show up. We're going to do a before, during, and after kind of look here. And so we're looking at before. So in this image, we got a lot of green out there. That's wonderful. Another fun thing about this kind of imagery is you can see down in the Alaska Range in the southeast corner of the image, it's blue. That's glaciers and snow in the mountains. So this is not really what the human eye can see. This is these wavelengths are beyond human vision, but we've made them look certain colors. So the vegetation looks green. Now let's look at that same kind of satellite recipe, but during the fires. This is in July. The fires are loose. You can see the smoke in the middle of the image, the smearing look of the smoke, and then we can see some clouds that are white. Icy clouds are blue. So this is in July of 2015. The fires are doing their thing. We're burning up millions of acres. Now let's go to September. The fires are out. The audience has left the theater. You know, the event's over, right? We're done. But guess what? Now look at those brown patches. All of those places are where the fire has burned away the vegetation. So you can see where the fire is, where you can add up these perimeters, get acreage burned and such. And so that's good to know. Now remember, flood follows fire, and these are also natural fire breaks. So you need to know where these guys are. In the course of the 2015 summer season, we went from before with not much burn scar in this area to just a couple months later, we can see so much burn scarring on the landscape. What's interesting, too, about the satellite and looking at burn scars is you realize that burn scars are the gift that keeps on giving. You can forget that a couple of years ago, maybe there was a fire in a certain area, but the satellite won't forget. So in the summertime, we get wildfires in Alaska, but guess what? In the visible imagery here, we can see the burn scars just a little bit, but they're not as prominent as in that veggie band. But then you can't see them at all if you cover them up with snow, right?
Exactly.
So here's an image from the middle of the winter time, and snow on the ground by this recipe looks blue. Again, these are wavelengths of light that the human eye can't really see. We're getting up into the infrared, near infrared, and the way we've assigned colors is if there's snow on the ground or there's a glacier, it looks blue, kind of intuitive. So this is early April of the following year, 2016. We're just about to get into breakup. We got a lot of snow on the ground, and now it's all going to melt. And as the snow melts, then you get Our final image here, doesn't this look familiar? This looks like a lot of what we saw in September of the previous summer. So this is the spring of the next year. The fires themselves might not have overwintered, they're gone, but the fire scar does. And as the snow melts away, and then you have breakup, and then you have green up, whenever the leaves come out, the grass comes back, except in the burned areas, they're having a tough time because everything got burned off the previous year. So you can see these scars even the next summer, multiple years. It depends on what kind of vegetation there is. You know, some of the tussocky tundra grasses, they'll grow back really quick, but to get a forest to come back, that'll take much longer. So these burn scars, eventually the landscape will fill in the burn scar. It will heal itself, if you want to use that metaphor. But for the next few years, you can still keep track of these on satellite. And again, the reason we want to do that is that the burn scar can facilitate a flood, and it can act like a fire break. So there you are, the
fascinating tools. So if you're a weather satellite and you're looking at my bowl of vegetables here, you might be able to pick out which one's the pea, which one's the tomato, and which one's the carrot, and apply that information precisely to whatever it is you're working on there. That is really fascinating stuff, that we have that capability from so high above the planet Earth, and Alaska for that matter.
Yep, eat your veggies.
Yes, definitely. I think I will. I'm hungry. Thanks so much for joining us again, Eric, and thank you for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. We'll see you right here next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Thank you for joining us for the marine portion of our broadcast. First, let's take a look at our sea ice oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Thank you for joining us for the marine portion of your broadcast. As you can see, the sea ice continues to slowly erode away across much of the Chukchi Sea and most of the Bering. A little bit of sea ice hanging around near Nome, but for the most part, we are seeing our seasonal erosion of ice. Even starting to see a little more sea ice erosion near Ukqiavik, up near that ice pack. So still seeing that ice pack decrease despite the colder temperatures. I should say colder than average temperatures that have been experienced across much of the state. Let's take a look for your Wednesday forecast for your Marines across the Panhandle. As you can see, we have winds up to about 20 knots and waves up to 5 feet near Ketchikan, with lighter winds and waves near Skagway. But definitely along the coast, we're seeing waves and winds in the small craft advisory category. We're seeing waves up to 9 feet. As we go into your Thursday, we see some of that diminish. We're seeing waves still, though, at 5 to 6 feet along the coast. As we go into interior areas, we see that winds and waves are a little weaker as well on Thursday, with waves generally around 2 feet and winds about 10 knots. And of course, in certain channeled areas, winds and waves could be a little stronger. So always travel with caution and be prepared. As we go into your Wednesday forecast for the North Gulf of Alaska coast, you can see we have winds up to 25 knots along the north coast. We also have waves up to about 3 feet. Even in generally sheltered areas of Prince William Sound, still seeing waves up to 3 feet. As we go towards Cook Inlet, we're going to be seeing waves about 3 to 4 feet and winds about 5 knots, generally from the north. As we go into your Thursday, again, we're seeing winds a little calmer, but we're still seeing waves of about 2 feet in Prince William Sound. And along the North Gulf Coast, waves generally 3 to 4 to up to 5 feet south of Seward. But again, winds generally 10 to 15 knots on your Thursday. As we go further south and west, as we look at along the Alaska Peninsula, on Wednesday, we generally have waves up to 5 feet south of the Alaska Peninsula and waves up to 4 feet outside of Kodiak's sheltered waters. But as we go into the Bristol Bay area, we're looking at winds 15 knots and waves about 3 to 4 feet. As we go into your Thursday, we're seeing generally winds of about 10 knots and waves maybe up to 4 feet near False Pass and south of the Alaska Peninsula, and a little more sheltered in Bristol Bay of about 2 to 3 feet for your Thursday. Wednesday, we can see out west, we're looking at, this is terrible, rain. More water. And I forgot to turn off the pings. Ugh, barf. Okay, restart. Thank you for joining us on the marine portion of your broadcast. We're first going to be looking at your sea ice conditions across the area. So you can see across the Chukchi Sea, we are losing sea ice as expected as seasonal. We're even starting to lose some sea ice near UAFTV. We still have a little sea ice hanging on near Nome, but generally we're seeing the reduction in sea ice coverage as it would be expected for this time of year. Let's take a look at your marine forecast for the Panhandle. As you can see, we have a little bit of a coastal jet occurring on Wednesday. So winds and waves and small craft advisory criteria of 25 knots, waves up to 8 to 9 feet as you go out of sheltered waters. Meanwhile, in interior waters, we're still seeing waves up to about 5 feet near Ketchikan and winds up to 20 knots. And in Skagway, 15 knots and waves up to 3 feet. But again, this could vary in channel terrain, so travel with caution. As we go for Thursday, winds and waves are a little calmer. Interior areas generally around 2 feet for waves and winds up to 10 to 15 knots in interior areas. As we go along the coast, we see the waves again are about 6 to 5 feet with winds generally 15 knots. Let's look at your North Gulf Coast forecast. For Wednesday, seeing Prince William Sound, we are looking at waves about 3 feet and winds about 10 knots. As you go out of sheltered areas, waves up to 6 to 7 feet. And outside of Seward, we're looking at waves up to 4 feet and winds of about 15 knots. In Cook Inlet, as you get south of Homer, again, we're looking at waves of about 4 feet and winds 15 knots. But as you go north, we're looking at winds and waves that are about 3 foot waves and 15 knots. Thursday, we're looking at slightly calmer conditions, waves about 2 feet in Prince William Sound and winds about 10 knots, and waves getting up to about 5 feet south of Seward and generally 4 feet in the Cook Inlet area and the north of Kodiak. And as you go further north, winds and waves a little calmer. Let's see, as you go further west, near Kodiak Island, for Wednesday, we're looking at waves at about 4 feet, winds 15 knots. As you go further south, winds and waves a little stronger, looking at 5 feet out of Falls Pass. Bristol Bay, a little more sheltered, we're looking at 4 feet. And then as you go...
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.